Okay, so let's unpack this for a second.
Hmm?
How does a practice that, relies on medicines diluted so much that supposedly no original molecules remain, how does that lead to a 2024 scientific paper using like deep learning and electron microscopes to prove something is actually still there?
Yeah, it is a massive intellectual whiplash, honestly. I mean, you are looking at a literal collision between 18th century philosophy and 21st century nanotechnology.
Right, right. And just to set the table for everyone listening, before we jump into quantum physics and water memory, we have a very specific mission today for you all. Our goal with this deep dive into the source material is absolutely not to endorse homeopathy, nor is it to debunk it.
Exactly.
We aren't taking a side in the scientific turf war that has been raging for, 250 years now?
2.5 centuries, yeah. So think of us as your impartial tour guides through a very dense, very controversial stack of documents. We are going to break down the actual arguments being made by these researchers, look at how they define this practice scientifically, and explore a really fascinating question.
Which is basically, why are millions of people, along with some highly prominent global figures, still using this today, despite, intense skepticism?
Right. And to even understand why someone is running supposedly empty water through an AI model in 2024, we actually have to understand the foundational argument. We need to rewind to 18th century Germany and a physician named Samuel Hahnemann.
Yeah, and reading through these texts, Hahnemann comes across like an early, extreme biohacker.
That is actually a great way to put it. I mean, Hahnemann was incredibly disillusioned with the medicine of his day, which, to be fair, involved a lot of bloodletting and toxic chemicals.
Yeah, not a great time to be a patient.
Definitely not. So he was translating a medical treatise on cinchona bark, which was the standard treatment for malaria back then. But he fundamentally disagreed with the author's explanation of why the bark worked, so he decided the only way to find out was to take it himself while he was perfectly healthy.
And here is where the entire paradigm shifts. Hahnemann documents that after taking the bark, he starts developing a fever, chills, joint pain. Basically, he induces malaria-like symptoms in himself.
Right.
And from that one observation, he derives the absolute bedrock of homeopathy, the law of similars, similibus curantur, like cures like.
Yes, exactly. The theory being that a substance capable of provoking specific symptoms in a healthy body can, in an ultra-diluted form, cure those exact same symptoms in a sick body.
Okay, but I have to stop right there and push back on the methodology, right? Because taking a handful of tree bark and getting the chills is a sample size of exactly one.
Right, yeah.
How does one guy's anecdotal self-dosing weekend turn into a global medical doctrine that survives for centuries?
Well, it's a completely valid skeptical response, and the historical documents address it directly. Hahnemann didn't just stop with himself. He formalized a massive, incredibly rigid experimental process that he called provings, which are detailed in his primary textbook, The Organon.
So what did a proving actually look like in practice?
It involved taking a specific substance and administering it to a large, controlled group of completely healthy volunteers. Then they would painstakingly record every single physiological, mental, and emotional change that occurred.
Wow.
Yeah, they weren't just looking for a rash. They were recording if the person felt anxious in the morning, if they had a craving for salt, if a joint ached only when it rained. They built massive encyclopedic databases of these symptom profiles.
And that database building didn't stop in the 18th century, which is key.
Oh.
The sources highlight a modern giant in this field, a Greek homeopath named George Vithulkas.
Oh, yeah. Vithulkas is a monumental figure in this space.
Right. He actually won the Right Livelihood Award, which is widely recognized as the Alternative Nobel Prize back in 1996. And this was for his work completely upgrading classical homeopathy for the modern era.
Yes, Vithulkas took those massive 18th and 19th century encyclopedias and helped digitize them. He co-developed a specialized software called the VES, the Vithulkas Expert System. But the crucial thing Vithulkas emphasizes, which really highlights the divide between this and conventional medicine, is what exactly they are treating.
Right, because if I go to a standard doctor with a migraine, they give me a pill chemically designed to suppress the pain receptors in my head. But the homeopathic approach outlined here is fundamentally different. They don't view the migraine as the core problem.
Precisely. They view the localized symptom, the migraine, the rash, the cough, as merely a dashboard warning light. The actual disease, according to this framework, is a disturbance in what they call the patient's dynamic plane or vital force.
Which sounds a bit mystical. What is the vital force in a modern context?
Well, in these texts, it's described less like magic and more like the body's underlying homeostatic intelligence. It's the integrated network of your immune system, your nervous system, your biological resilience.
Okay, I see.
Conventional or allopathic medicine looks at the physical matter. Kill the bacteria, suppress the inflammation. Homeopathy claims to be an energetic medicine designed to stimulate that vital force so the body orchestrates its own cure.
And I found this fascinating. According to Vithoulkas, that self-cure isn't always a pleasant experience. There's this concept called an initial aggravation.
Yeah, and this is one of the biggest points of friction with mainstream medicine. When a classical homeopath gives a remedy, they sometimes expect the patient's symptoms to temporarily get worse.
Which feels entirely counterintuitive. Why would you want the patient to feel worse?
Because in their paradigm, the symptom is the body's way of expelling the disease. Like a fever is the body cooking off a virus. So if the remedy successfully stimulates the vital force, that force might temporarily crank the fever up to finally kick the illness out, resulting in a deep, permanent cure.
Ah, so conventional medicine views the symptom as the enemy to be stopped immediately, while homeopathy views it as a defense mechanism to be supported. Okay, so we have the philosophy down. But the philosophy isn't what makes people so incredibly angry about homeopathy. The absolute center of the controversy is how the medicines are actually made.
Yes, the dilution paradox.
Let's get into the chemistry, because here is where things get really wild.
So the process is called potentization, and it involves two specific steps: extreme dilution and vigorous shaking, which they call succussion.
So let's walk through this physically for the listener. They take 1 drop of a starting substance, let's say gold, and they mix it with 99 drops of water and alcohol. That's a 1C potency.
Right.
Then they smack the vial against a hard surface. Then they take 1 drop from that new vial, put it in 99 drops of fresh water, and smack it again. That's 2C.
And they keep doing this 30 times, 200 times, sometimes 10,000 times.
But mathematically, you run into a brick wall eventually, right? The texts mention the Avogadro limit. For anyone who hasn't taken a chemistry class in a while, what actually is that limit?
Well, Avogadro's number is a fundamental constant in chemistry that essentially tells us how many atoms or molecules are in a given amount of a substance. If you keep diluting a solution by a factor of 100, eventually you literally run out of the original atoms. There is simply no more physical matter left to divide.
And the texts state that this limit is hit at a 12C dilution.
Yeah.
So by the time you hit a 30C or 200C remedy, statistically, the odds of a single atom of the original gold remaining in that vial are practically zero.
Which is the ultimate weapon of the detractors. For over 2 centuries, the critics have said, look at the math, look at the chemistry, you are selling people drops of empty water.
And for a long time, homeopaths didn't have a great scientific comeback other than, well, it works clinically. But then we get to this brand new 2024 paper published in the Journal of Molecular Liquids.
Yes, this is where modern measurement tools are completely disrupting the old arguments. Researchers took ultra-high dilutions, 30C and 200C potencies of metals like gold, copper, and tin. According to the Avogadro limit, these should be nothing but purified water. But the researchers didn't use 19th century chemistry tools. They used transmission electron microscopy, or TEM.
Which is capable of seeing down to the atomic level.
Exactly. And alongside the electron microscope, they used Raman spectroscopy. To explain that simply, Raman spectroscopy involves shooting a laser into a sample and measuring how the light scatters. Every chemical element scatters light in a totally unique way, creating a specific echo or fingerprint.
And the researchers actually found the fingerprint. The texts show that in these supposedly empty 30C and 200C solutions, the electron microscopes and the lasers detected physical nanoparticles of the starting materials.
That's incredible.
There were microscopic cluster assemblies of gold still present in the liquid.
It completely shatters the idea that ultra-high dilutions are totally devoid of the original substance. And it gets even more complex. They took the spectral data, those light echoes from the Raman spectroscopy, and fed them into a deep learning AI.
A gated recurrent unit, or GRU model, right? How does that work?
So, a GRU is a type of artificial intelligence specifically designed to find hidden, incredibly subtle patterns in sequential data. Humans couldn't possibly look at the raw data and see a difference between the liquids, but the AI could.
And the results in the paper are staggering. The AI discriminated between unpurified water, regular purified water, and the different homeopathic potencies of gold with over 95% accuracy.
Yeah, over 95%.
The AI could essentially taste the physical structural differences in water that classical chemistry insists should be completely identical.
And this isn't an isolated incident. The documentation references earlier foundational work, like a 2010 study by Chickermain and colleagues, which also proved the retention of nanoparticles in extreme dilutions. But the addition of the AI model proves that the physical structure of the liquid itself is permanently altered by the potentization process.
Okay, I hear that. And finding a gold nanoparticle in a 200C dilution is mind-bending. But I have to play the skeptic again here, because even if the AI can tell the vials apart, we have a massive gap in logic.
Okay, let's hear it.
How does a single microscopic nanoparticle actually cure a systemic disease? If I have a massive bacterial infection, a nanoparticle of gold doesn't have the chemical mass to kill billions of bacteria. It's like trying to stop a freight train with a pebble.
That is the exact right question to ask, and the theoretical framework laid out in these papers argues that we are asking the wrong kind of question.
What do you mean?
Well, we are thinking about medicine chemically as a physical weight of drugs meant to bomb a pathogen. The proponents hypothesize that ultra-dilute remedies do not operate chemically. They operate biophysically.
Biophysically? Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning it's about information and resonance, not mass. Think about how the remedies are made. They aren't just diluted, they are succussed. They are violently shaken. The hypothesis is that this intense mechanical shock forces the water molecules to form unique structural clusters around the original nanoparticle. It's like striking a tuning fork against a table. The striking forces the metal into a specific vibration. The succussion forces the water into a specific electromagnetic alignment, creating an energetic template of the original substance.
And this ties into some fascinating adjacent research mentioned in the broader scope of these debates. The texts allude to the idea that biological material can leave an electromagnetic footprint. We've seen this kind of boundary-pushing science from mainstream heavyweights, like the late Nobel laureate Luc Montagnier.
Yes, Montagnier is a perfect example of this paradigm clash. I mean, he literally won the Nobel Prize in Medicine for co-discovering the HIV virus.
Right.
But later in his career, he published research claiming that highly diluted solutions containing the DNA of viruses and bacteria could actually emit low-frequency electromagnetic signals.
So the idea is that the water retains the electromagnetic ghost of the substance. And when a patient takes the homeopathic remedy, that nanoparticle or structural cluster acts like a biological tuning fork. It introduces a specific frequency into the body's vital force, triggering the immune system to react.
Right, it's communicating an instruction, not delivering a chemical payload. It relies on the concept that water can store and transmit complex structural information. Water memory.
Which, let's be honest, sounds completely like science fiction. But the documentation dives straight into this exact concept through the controversial work of a Japanese researcher named Masaru Emoto. He wrote a famous book called Messages from Water.
Yeah, Emoto was deeply interested in a concept he called HADO, which is a Japanese term he used to describe subtle energies, life force, or what we might call chi. He wanted to know if this subtle vibrational energy could physically alter matter. And to test it, he used water.
And the setup described here is wild. Emoto used a magnetic resonance analyzer and high-speed photography in the sub-zero room. He would freeze droplets of water and photograph the microscopic ice crystals exactly at the moment of crystallization.
And he didn't just freeze tap water. He exposed the water to different stimuli beforehand. He played classical music to one vial and heavy metal to another. He taped positive words like love and gratitude to some jars and negative words to others.
Now, mechanically, how could a word on a piece of paper or a song alter water? I mean, come on.
Well, the theoretical mechanism goes back to vibration. Sound is literally a physical pressure wave that moves through the air and impacts liquid. It's similar to cymatics, where you play a tone on a metal plate covered in sand, and the sand spontaneously organizes into perfect geometric patterns.
Oh, right. I've seen videos of that.
Emoto hypothesized that water is highly sensitive to these vibrational frequencies, and that even human consciousness or emotional intention carries a subtle resonance that water absorbs.
And the photographic results they describe are haunting. Exposing the water to classical music supposedly created these brilliantly symmetrical, complex, beautiful crystals. But the most striking example in the text centers on the Kobe earthquake in January 1995.
Right. Emoto took tap water from Kobe immediately after the devastating quake and photographed it as it froze. The resulting crystals, according to the documentation, were totally deformed. They looked grotesque and agonized. The theory is that the water had literally absorbed the collective panic, terror, and profound grief of the city's population.
And then they did a follow-up experiment. A couple of years later, Emoto organized an event where 500 people simultaneously focused their thoughts on a sample of that exact same Kobe tap water.
Yes.
They sent prayers, positive intentions, and chi. When he froze and photographed it again, the water formed a brilliant, perfectly formed hexagonal crystal.
It's an amazing story.
Okay, but I'm going to interrupt again because the skepticism alarms are deafening right now. Every single snowflake that falls from the sky is naturally unique. If you sit in a freezer and photograph 1,000 water drops, you will get 1,000 different shapes.
Right, of course.
How do we know the researcher isn't just suffering from massive confirmation bias? Like, oh, here's a really ugly crystal, I'll put that in the earthquake folder, and here's a pretty one that goes in the prayer folder.
And that sharp critique is exactly why Emoto's work is largely rejected by the mainstream scientific establishment. It is incredibly difficult to reproduce under strict double-blind conditions.
Yeah, that makes sense.
However, within the context of the proponents arguing for homeopathy, Emoto's photographs are championed because they provide a visual language for the unseen. Even if it's metaphorical, it illustrates the core premise that water is not just a passive, empty solvent. It is an active medium capable of receiving, storing, and physically reflecting vibrational information.
Which brings us to the ultimate reckoning of this entire debate. We've talked about Hahnemann's biohacking, AI finding nanoparticles, and Emoto's emotional ice crystals. But let's zoom out. We have a practice whose mechanisms have been fiercely, relentlessly attacked by detractors for 250 years.
Yes, nonstop attacks.
They've constantly tried to dismantle it by demanding hard biochemical evidence. They want proof of the mechanism. And yet, the documents show that homeopathy hasn't just survived the attacks, it is massively expanded.
That is the crux of the proponent's counter-argument right there. If it was simply a delusion, it would have faded away into medical history alongside bloodletting. But instead, we see massive institutional survival. The proponents are issuing a direct reply to their detractors here. They are essentially saying, you have tried to destroy us for 2.5 centuries and you failed. And now you demand evidence of the mechanism when people just keep getting cured.
Exactly. Look at India, for example. The history in the text is fascinating. It was introduced to India around 1810 by a German doctor, but it really exploded in 1839 during the severe cholera epidemics driven by a physician named Dr. Honigberger.
Yes, Honigberger was having tremendous clinical success saving lives where the conventional, harsh treatments of the British Empire were actively failing.
And today, the integration in India is staggering. We are talking about an entire dedicated department within the Indian government's Ministry of Health. There are state-funded homeopathic hospitals, universities, and over 400,000 registered homeopaths practicing officially. It is completely woven into the daily healthcare infrastructure of over 1 billion people.
And why did it take root so deeply there?
The sources suggest a profound cultural synergy. The allopathic model of treating the body as a purely mechanical chemical machine didn't fully align with Eastern philosophies.
Right.
Homeopathy's focus on an unseen, dynamic, vital force perfectly mirrored the Hindu philosophical understanding of spirituality, the flow of prana or life energy, and the interconnectedness of mind and body. It validated their cultural worldview while actually providing medical results.
And it's not just culturally aligned developing nations either. The texts subtly remind us of high-profile institutional support in the West. Look at the British royal family.
Oh, this is a huge point. For generations, the personal, official physicians to the King of England and the royal family have been homeopaths. You have a family with access to literally any medical technology on Earth, actively choosing this system.
Which brings us back to the great philosophical standoff between the detractors and the proponents. For 250 years, the detractors have said, if you cannot explain the mechanism to us using current chemistry, then your clinical results must be entirely the placebo effect.
And I have to ask about that. Even Vithulkas, the great modern pioneer we mentioned, admits in these texts that the placebo effect is a very real phenomenon in human healing. Could this 250 years survival just be the most successful, culturally reinforced placebo effect in human history?
Well, the proponents issue a very passionate rebuttal to that in these sources. They argue that when a patient has been suffering from a chronic, debilitating condition for years and conventional medicine has failed them, and then they take a homeopathic remedy and finally get their life back, the debate over the mechanism is entirely irrelevant to them. The detractors are demanding to know how it works, but for the patient who is finally cured, they don't care how it worked.
Right. They don't care if it was a nanoparticle, water memory, or a placebo. They just care that the pain is gone.
Exactly. The argument laid out here is that true science should observe and respect clinical outcomes first. If millions of people are getting well, the scientific community shouldn't deny the reality of the healing simply because their current microscopes aren't powerful enough to explain how it happened. The burden, they argue, is on science to build better tools to understand the mechanism, not to destroy a practice that provides relief.
It is a phenomenal clash of worldviews. The skeptics demand the mechanism before they will believe the results. The homeopaths point to the results and invite science to catch up and find the mechanism. And maybe things like deep learning AI models and transmission electron microscopes are the first fragile bridges across that 250-year-old divide. Because now we have Nobel-level minds, from Vithulkas's alternative Nobel to Montaigne's actual Nobel, pointing to the science of it all.
We have certainly covered incredible ground today, from an 18th century doctor intentionally giving himself malaria, to Vithulkas mapping the vital force, to AI detecting the invisible architecture of water, all the way to India's Ministry of Health and the King of England's doctors.
It's an immense amount of information to synthesize. Whether you walk away from this viewing homeopathy as a visionary biophysical science or a beautifully elaborate placebo, the sheer persistence and evolution of the practice is undeniably compelling.
It absolutely is. And I'd like to leave you with one broader philosophical question to ponder, something that really emerges from the space between these sources.
Okay, let's hear it.
Think about the history of human knowledge. Science is entirely defined and limited by the tools we possess at any given moment. Humanity couldn't perceive bacteria before the invention of the optical microscope, so we genuinely believed diseases were caused by bad air.
Right, our reality was constrained by our lenses.
So could water possess complex structural physics, quantum behaviors, and memory capacities that are incredibly real, but that our current scientific paradigms are simply too young and too blunt to fully measure? Are we just waiting for the right kind of microscope?
Wow, a liquid hard drive, just waiting for the right scanner to read it. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. Whatever your takeaway from the chemistry or the controversy, keep questioning the paradigms around you, keep exploring, and stay insanely curious.